Dire Alliance Horror from Blacklist Games is on Kickstarter now, and here to talk to us a little bit more about it is David Thompson, one of the designers. David, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
David, for those who don't know what Dire Alliance Horror is, why don't you give us an overview of what kind of game this is and how it plays out?
Yeah, so Dire Alliance Horror is actually a few different things, right? So on the Kickstarter, if you go there, it's first of all, it's both a game and a line of miniatures. So this is a new thing that Blacklist is doing, where they put out a theme of horror minis, and so you can go to the Kickstarter and back just the minis if you wanted to. But
Okay.
the game, Dire Alliance Horror, the game is it's two different. It's also two different things. So what I've been involved with from a design perspective is what we call the battle mode, the head-to-head competitive mode. So it's a horror theme, primarily Victorian or Gothic horror inspired,
Nice.
uh, direct, one v one competitive game where each player takes on a faction of monsters and teams them up with a leader, and then he plays another player, doing the same thing, taking a faction of four guys with the leader,
Okay.
and you can have all sorts of different combinations and go head to head. Now, the other part of the game is what we call the raid mode, which is a solo or co-op up to four players mode that is similar in some ways to the battle mode. Some of the gameplay mechanics are similar in DNA, but it's actually you playing against those same sort of baddies that you would play in the competitive mode, but you're taking on the role of a hero in that.
Okay.
So Dire Alliance Horror is a lot of things.
It is a lot of things. And what is the basic gameplay of Dire Alliance?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk as we discuss this. I'll talk primarily to the battle mode, right? Unless you guys
Okay.
ask me otherwise, because again, that's what I worked on the design for. So that's both myself and Trevor Benjamin, who's my design partner that I worked with on War Chest and Undaunted Normandy in North Africa. So that's what I worked on. And then when we were finished with that battle mode, Adam and Brady Sadler took that and designed the raid mode. So
Okay.
so for the battle mode. It is really, we call it deck building, but as we were talking about off camera before the interview started, it's if you really wanted to dive deep into it, it's more like deck manipulation or deck management, because what
Okay.
you're going to be doing is you'll have a starting deck, you'll have a couple of cards from each character, and those you're going to be playing those cards to take actions with the character. Every character has special powers,
Okay.
but you have the ability in the course of the game to add cards from each character to your deck. So what you're going to do, obviously, is add more cards of characters who you want to go more often, right? You want to increase their effectiveness. So
Right.
from that regard, it's not really deck building in the traditional sense, but you're manipulating the deck to your advantage, right? What you're trying to accomplish. Um, but then as your opponent, one of the key elements of the game is damage in the game is represented by the loss of these same cards, and it's not a temporary loss. It's almost always a permanent loss of those cards. So
Okay.
the more damage you take, the more cards you lose, and so the weaker your characters will get just organically.
Right. And if you lose all your cards, then you're out.
You're done.
Yeah, not only are you out, so it's bad enough because you've lost one of your five characters that you're controlling, right? And so that's bad enough, but actually what in the game when you lose a character when they're knocked off the battlefield, you add two what are called dread cards to your deck, and
Oh,
these dread cards are horrible because essentially they're just dead cards in your deck. Now you can take an action with a character to get rid of one of them, but you're basically losing an entire turn to do that.
wow.
So
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
yeah, it really messes your deck up when you lose a character.
Yeah, I mean, the more time you take in between turns, the more can happen on the enemy's turn, and you definitely don't want that to happen. What is Dire Alliance's origin story? Where did this idea come from?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, people who are familiar with the games that I mentioned before that Trevor and I have worked on, War Chest and Undaunted, they will see similar DNA run through those three games. So, Dire Alliance, Undaunted, and War Chest. And so, the origin story is that Brady Sadler, was so obviously, like I mentioned, he's works at Blacklist Games, one of the leads there, and he was playing Undaunted, and he had really liked it, and so he just tweeted out, "Hey, I'm really digging this game. What would it be like if there was an adventure game that used some of these same mechanics?" And
Hmm.
so we started talking, and one thing led to another, and Dire Alliance was born. So Now, I will say that people have said like, "Hey, this is a horror themed version of Undaunted," and just to manage expectations, that's not true, right? There's a lot of differences between the games, but there are enough gameplay similarities in the way in which you manage your force that I think it's a fair comparison.
Awesome.
Okay. So in the raid mode, is it just beat on the boss until they're dead, or is there some other victory conditions?
So in the base scenario that they're working on now, it is very much stop the boss from accomplishing their task, and that's typically what it's going to be.
Okay.
So it'll be the leader and their minions, right, moving around the board trying to accomplish a goal, and you basically are there to stop them. Now, I won't speak for Adam and Brady and talk about what the art of the possible is, and what other things they have planned for that, but at least for now, that's where they are with the raid mode.
Okay.
Awesome.
How many scenarios come with the core set?
Yeah, so there are two different boards, or a double-sided board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Each board has 3 scenarios for battle mode, and each board has 2 scenarios for raid mode. So there's 10 scenarios total across the game.
Oh,
So
wow.
lots of different variety. And then like we talked about, there are multiple different leaders, multiple different factions, and so when you think in terms of all the different potential combinations that you can have, that there's a lot of variety.
Have you done the math?
I have. Well, there is regular math, and then there's stretch goal math, and so I don't know. I'm not really at liberty to talk stretch goal specifics, but I'll tell you that the math it gets exponential, right?
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, you've talked about the different modes. I mean, how different is the game if you're playing PvP versus the co-op raid or even solo raid? How different does the game play through?
It's a very different. For sure, it definitely is a different feeling, right? Evokes a very different feeling. Now, there's some similarities in the way, like you're managing a deck in the same way. So you're in the raid mode, so the solo co-op mode. You're a character. You're playing a single character,
Right.
and you're taking on that character's like who that character is, and also their class. So those 2 different combinations dictates the cards that are available to you. And so instead of deck building 5 characters into a deck, you're deck building a single character with all of the cards that tie back to their class. Right?
Okay.
But the actual like playing of cards is there are some similarities, but I would say that they're quite a bit different, right? I would say they're more different than they are similar in many ways.
Yeah.
For sure, the feeling that the game gives you. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
So when you guys were initially playtesting this game, there's a lot of different scenarios. Obviously, you can come through. Any fun stories that come to mind of scenarios that sort of popped up, or fun little gameplay moments?
Oh wow, that's a good question. I was not prepared for this one. Let me think about this. Well, I would just say generally speaking. So maybe not one single moment, but we just had a ton of fun with the theme, right? So Trevor and I are big theme guys, and so hopefully that is comes through in the game. And so we have a guy called the Butcher, right? So there's a faction called the Grievers, and they're all about animating dead and controlling them. And this guy called the Butcher, so he goes out and he's got a cleaver, and his whole thing is he's hacking off, limbs of his opponents, and he's going to take them back to a guy, and he's going to use those body parts to raise dead. So like just the little stories. Now, I will also say that Brady Sadler is the sort of creative mind behind a lot of it. Once we turned it over to him, and he's instilled a lot of life into the game. So we have this one of the leaders is called Dr. Kramer, and her monster is Rutger. And there's a lot of the game is like taking tropes and doing a little spin on them. So it's clear that this is Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
Dr. Kramer and Rutger, and that's clearly like her prior love interest or whatever. So it's just a lot of little cool thematic flourishes to the game that are fun to play out.
And speaking of theme, Dire Alliance Horror is actually, you're saying this is actually the first in a series of cross-compatible games. Are you planning to have a series of Dire Alliance themes or games come out of this? What's the future hold?
It will depend on how successful it is, right?
Sure.
So the idea from the start was to have a core foundation that could be modular, right?
Okay.
So if Dire Alliance whatever comes out next, then it would be something that theoretically you could combine the two and play them, and that's the design goal from the start.
Okay.
Hmm.
I could see this would work well, even staying with the horror theme, but like into the Cthulhu mythos. This would be like a
Sure. Yeah.
beautiful game to throw into that mythos, but at the same time, you could really go any kind of theme, which is wonderful with what you've set up here. And what I love about it is it's, as you're saying, it's deck management, but there's still a board. You're still moving characters
Mhm.
around a board and attacking the enemy and doing and adding status effects to your enemies, and it's a really unique concept. And I love what you're creating there.
Mm. How much time have you spent, thinking up different themes that you could sort of move forward to? I'm sure you have a whole, binder full of different ideas already.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, ultimately that'll be Blacklist's decision, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Sure.
whatever, but it will need to align to their minis line, right? Like that's the intent is, hey, they have a new minis line they want to put out, and we would craft it around there. I will say that from my perspective, and I think I can speak for Trevor too when I say this, it's actually easier for us if we're provided a constraint, like, hey, we want the theme to be X. Okay, cool. Now we can go and think
Gotcha.
of whatever.
Right.
If they said, hey, there's would make it whatever you want, man, we would just sit there for forever and not be able to come to conclusion.
Right, right.
But,
Can you touch a bit on the minis that you're also launching in the same campaign? You originally launched a set of fantasy minis, 70 minis in a box that you could use with any fantasy game. But you're also releasing a set of minis for the horror line. Can you
yeah.
talk a bit about these minis?
Yeah, so that is very much in the wheelhouse of Adam Sadler. So he is the lead for Blacklist when it comes to their minis lines. So I can't really, I genuinely don't know a whole lot of specifics, right? Other than that's sort of the other half of the company. But
Right. Okay.
very much, essentially, what happened was Adam and Brady said, "Hey, we wanted to be horror."
Yeah.
We wanted to be gothic, Victorian, and Brady's very much inspired by like the Castlevania series of video games and stuff. So you'll see some of
Nice.
that inspiration sprinkled throughout.
Right.
But they gave us full reign when it came to like how the factions were developed, and then they based the minis on that. So as long as
Okay.
we adhere to those same kind of guidelines, it's not like we had this weird, awkward smash up of minis that really weren't applicable to the game, right? We
Okay.
designed the game, and then they crafted the minis to sort of fit that, as long as we adhere to the general guidelines.
So the horror minis will naturally fit into Dire
100%.
Alliance. That's awesome.
It's everything about the game. So there won't be a single mini in the line that doesn't have a corresponding gameplay element in the game.
That's
It's
very cool.
100%. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's nice that it's optional. You don't, and not only is it optional, but if you do get the minis, they're the whole point of Blacklist's mini line is they will go with any horror game. You can take those minis and put them in a game that you think they'll fit with. I think that's a really brilliant idea. And not like I don't know of anyone else doing that kind of thing. And 70 minis in a box, you can't ask for more.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and that's
71. You could ask for more.
71.
I guess
Yeah, well,
71 would be more.
yeah, and it's crazy that it's that many minis from the start, right?
Yeah.
Because when
Yeah.
you start unlocking stretch goals and stuff, yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
It's cool.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
So, post Kickstarter, say somebody's catching on to this, after your campaign has ended, where are they going to be able to pick up Dire Alliance? Is it going to retail or just available through the store at Blacklist?
So, man, this is another question. Sorry, this is another question for Blacklist. It's for sure. It will be available through Blacklist.
Okay.
I think their intent is to make it as available as possible at retail, but don't hold me to that. For
That's
sure, it
fair.
will be available through them.
Online at Blacklist website.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, the Kickstarter is going on right now. The game, it sounds amazing, and I can't wait to play it myself. I am very excited for it. I love what I'm seeing. David, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the campaign.
Yeah, sure. And I will say this too. That reminds me, for people who are interested in checking out, you can play the game on Tabletop Simulator. Both modes have workshops available there. You can check
Awesome.
them out.
Fantastic.
Go check it out
Great.
on Tabletop Simulator, and then go back it on Kickstarter. Thanks for
There you
joining
go.
us, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Okay, everybody. Hope you like what you've seen. Hope you like the sound of the game. If so, go back it on Kickstarter and make sure to subscribe to the channel, OMG Nexus.